who are these 4 African heroes in the Castle of Good Hope in Cape Town, South Africa. So the Castle of Good Hope was built by the Dutch East India Company, who were an enslaving company looking for a place to stop on their trips from the Netherlands down underneath the Cape of Good Hope in Africa and to the East Indies. It was intended to be a replenishment station, but it was fortified enough to keep the native South Africans out and to keep prisoners in. It was also the very first colonial building built by white settlers in South Africa. So then, why these 4 kings? Let's talk about them. So this is King Cetshwayo, the last official king of the Zulu. He was captured and detained right here in this castle in 1879. This was the dungeon in which they kept him, and these the chains that bound him. So King Cetshwayo had a really interesting life, right? He was known for banishing European missionaries from his land and then inciting other native African groups to rebel against the Dutch Boers. King Cetshwayo stood in the way of English settlers as well because they wanted to unite a South African colony, and so they antagonized the Zulu, hoping that he would attack first. After a series of battles that cost many, many British and Zulu lives, he sought a peace treaty, but the British responded with mercenaries, right? He was captured, imprisoned, and then sent to London, where he received quite a lot of sympathetic press and sort of had a fan club because of this person here, a Scottish feminist writer, Lady Florence Dixie. He also had himself photographed in his British overcoat, and this portrait painted of him as well. Next is King Sekhukune of the BaPedi or the Marota. He was also captured and detained at the same time as our first guy. And he had inherited his father Sekwa's throne right as the South African Republic declared war against his people in 1876. So the Dutch hired Prussian mercenaries who were promised 2,000 acres each of his land. And the mercenaries were brutal, killing women and children, taking no captives, right? And as the violence escalated, the Dutch Boers illegally began enslaving the native African captives. The British, spotting an opportunity, stepped in and mediated a peace treaty, but the war continued until King Sekhukune was captured. Oh, sorry, this is him. Our next one is Mdingi or Mthethwa, better known as King Langalibalele, which means the blazing sun in his language, AmaHlubi. And he was the king of the AmaHlubi, who were a group of Bantus from KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, right? During the 1870s, he worked on the diamond mines in Kimberley along with his people and became just a bit too powerful. The colonial authorities demanded that all of his people register their guns, and Langalibalele refused, massacring the British, who then imprisoned him for 30 years on Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was also incarcerated. Now, why did he do that? It's because there was an inconsistent enforcement of the policy regarding Native people and their guns. And when I say Native, I mean Black Africans, right? Black South Africans, because both the British and the Dutch colonizers were afraid that the Native Africans would side with the other. Here is a photograph of him, and my favorite fact about Langalibalele is that a lot of his descendants ended up living in a township outside of Cape Town, and they named their township after him, Langa, which is here, right outside of Cape Town. And I will do another TikTok on them because Langa has some of the most beautiful murals I have ever seen. Last, but in nowhere least, he was actually chronologically first, is Doman Nommoa Goringhaiqua, who is the leader of the first Dutch Khoi War, or Khoi-Dutch War. So he was a KhoiKhoi pastoralist and an interpreter with the Dutch settlers at the Cape of Good Hope, and he worked briefly for the Dutch East India Company, until they made the mistake of bringing him to Java, where he saw the way that they treated the native people there, and he turned against the Dutch, right? So when he got back, he led his people in a war against the Dutch in 1658. And he was incredibly intelligent, right? Despite not having much experience with firearms himself, he had observed that when it rained, the Dutch didn't tend to be such good shots because if their gunpowder got too wet, their pistols wouldn't fire. And so that is when he waited. He waited for a rainy day and ordered his people to attack. When he died, the Dutch governor said, and honestly, I love this, if someone would say this of me when I die, amazing. He said, quote, "None of us will have cause to grieve, as he has been, in many respects, a mischievous and malicious man toward the company." I mean, good for him, right? Follow for more South African content. I was there last month and I've got a lot.